Hello, everybody, and welcome to the General Eclectic podcast with Roger. I'm your host, Kale Zelden, and we're here for episode 4. Rod, we've made it a whole month, 4 shows.
A whole month.
Pretty exciting.
And might I point out that you, my friend, are dressed for the winter. You have snow in your backyard. I, however, here in late January in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, I'm wearing linen.
78 degrees versus what? It's like 30. And we actually had a beautiful snow here today in Rhode Island. I have to admit, though, I hate the snow. I mean, it looks pretty, but when you have to deal with it, like, that's just the part of me that I've never been able to shake. Sort of that I hold on to it. Maybe it's sort of my southern pride. I don't know, but I
think what it is when we were growing up, because our listeners may or may not know that you're from Baton Rouge. It rarely ever snowed. We got snow maybe once every 3 or 4 years, so it was something magical.
Yeah, once in my lifetime until I was 17.
So it was magical. So. But then I moved to the north in my adulthood, and snow, like when we lived in New York City, snow was just like, oh no, again, and it's a very very different attitude toward it. It's just weather there. It's not magic. It's just weather.
You know, it's interesting. And so part of me feels a little guilty about being cranky about the snow, right? And because you have to shovel and you have to wear gear. I mean, that's the thing when you live up here and you have kids. You have all this gear that you have to deal with: snowshoes and boots and pants and jackets and waterproof gloves and all this sort of stuff that as a kid I had no need for, so we didn't have any of it. So it's a little bit of a hassle, but. The thing that I do appreciate about living in New England is, the variation. It's a real thing. It's the variation is gives sort of contour to and rhythm to your life in a way. I remember, and you're dealing with this right now. You're in this sort of this. It's not quite as hot for several months, right? And you have these sort of occasional cold spells, and then it's just going to get perma hot. For a long time. There's a flatness to that, right?
An oppressive flatness. It grinds you down. I mean, I think if you've gone through July and August in South Louisiana, you have no reason to fear hell. You know what it's like.
Amen. And you realize that July and August actually extends into September and October.
People cannot get over the fact when I tell them, it doesn't really start to cool down here till early November. They think I'm lying. They can't imagine it.
I distinctly remember I lived up in New Hampshire for a couple of years for college, and I went back home to Louisiana, to Baton Rouge for graduate school in English. And remember that first year back, and it's September, and I'm like, all right, it's September, and it's hot, and October it's still hot. And I remember going to a football game, an LSU football game right there on campus. And it's middle of November, and I was so excited because I could wear a long sleeve T-shirt.
That's Louisiana.
This was like crisp, crispy in mid-November. So, look, at any rate, there's a lot for us to get to tonight. I wanted to start off with a post you did just today, actually. Some of you may have not had a chance to see it, but I'm sure by the time this podcast gets edited and put out into the webs. You titled it "The Woke Elite Monoculture." It's kind of riffing on a piece you read on Tablet Magazine, online magazine. By the way, listeners, if you have not found your way to that magazine, please do. There's some just amazing articles that I've read just in the past month. It's definitely worth being part of your morning internet rotation. But anyway, Rod, you wanted to talk today a little bit about woke elite monoculture.
Well, it's an essay by Michael Lind, who's really emerging as one of the most acute observers of our current moment. And in it, Michael Lind says that throughout American history, elite culture has always been with us, no matter what phase of American life we've been in. But it has always been a local elite, either local in terms of a city, like say in New Orleans, or in terms of a region. And people who have wanted to live and work and raise families within particular regions knew which colleges they had to go to in order to be part of the elite, which clubs they had to attend, that sort of thing. Well, Michael Lind says now we have, for the first time in American history, a nationalized elite monoculture. And he says it has certain aspects of it. Like, for example, you have to go you have to have graduated from an Ivy League school or a prestige state university. And you have to be able to speak the language of the elites, which is defined by wokeness. And he points out, interestingly, that you keep track of what the current shibboleths are within that culture by social media, by following conversation on Twitter and so forth. This is, he says, a sorting mechanism for keeping the proles and the working class and the not clubbable people out of the professions and out of the elites. And he says that this, for the first time, this is not something that's just regional. It has gone national. And reading that, I thought, my gosh, this really is true. I am almost 54 years old. I'm just old enough to remember what it was like when you and I were growing up here in Louisiana, how if you wanted to make it in Louisiana, you had to go to LSU and Baton Rouge, or maybe Tulane, if you wanted to be more associated with New Orleans. But this is just what you did to succeed and to get into the elites where we live. Now, that's partly true, but it's also the case that the elite kids from elite schools, high schools in the state, they're looking at Ivy League schools, and they might not even be looking at staying in a place like Louisiana. But if they are still adopting the mindset, the mind of these elites, which is how you could get something like what happened in my hometown, where like the valedictorian of the high school graduating class this year in my hometown of like 1,800 people, she posted on her social media, "Black Trans Lives Matter." So but this is the nationalization of the elite.
Yeah, it's interesting. Rod, I just out of curiosity, you went to a kind of selective boarding school actually in Louisiana. How many schools did you apply to when you were a senior?
All right, well, I'm a bad example because I was so
Maybe
lazy.
not.
I just wanted to go to Georgetown, but my father shot that down, so I just stuck my lip out. I ended up applying to LSU, and thank God for it. My dad had the best sense in the world because he told me, I'm not going to go into debt for you to get an undergraduate degree, and I thought he was history's greatest monster, so it was just LSU. But your point, in general, I think is probably solid. A lot of the kids in my school applied to the Ivies, and a lot of them got in.
Yeah, so I was similarly uninspired as a senior in high school. I applied to LSU as well, and partly out of laziness, but partly, mom and dad just like, why not go to LSU? It's right here. They'll even, they splurged and they let me live on campus, even though I, was about 15, my parents lived about 15 minutes away from the center of campus, but I lived on campus, and that was it. And again, I don't know how much you remember of the application process, but I remember, you did it by hand, right? You got the actual application in the mail, and you'd fill it out, and you had maybe an essay, then maybe one, maybe two, I don't remember the details, and you folded it up, stuck it in the envelope, and you mailed it away, and you waited, right? As you have pointed out to the listeners, I work in a boarding school, and so most of our clientele are, what I call, sort of the working wealthy, right? Mom and dad work, mom and dad, mom's a doctor, dad's a lawyer, that kind of thing. And so they make a good amount of money, but they obviously have aspirations for their kids. Well, our students, they apply to 10, 12, 15 colleges. And the mechanism that has allowed them to do it so easily is the Common Application. And again, I'm not sure how much our viewers know about the Common Application, but basically it is what it sounds. It's a you log in and you put in all your information, and you can choose, just like on a pull down menu, you can hit click, 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 and click. And then some of those schools, again, some of the more fancier schools, the New England liberal arts schools or high-powered state schools, like you point out, certainly the Ivy Leagues, they have supplements. And so you'll add like an additional essay if you want to apply, to Harvard. The only school, I think, at this point that still holds out from the Common Application is Georgetown, right? Which fashions itself as a kind of... it depends on who you talk to, but it's sort of Ivy League adjacent, right? But the point is that it is a lot easier for people to sort of broadcast into this sort of these elite circles, right? So it doesn't, there's a sort of a labor, cut down. But what in essence this does is that it draws, and okay, there's another part of the story that I want to add. So some of our parents, especially some of our late boomer parents, our Gen X parents, and part of our cohort know that the Ivy Leagues, even in their time, were beginning to become untouchable, right? So, but some of the late boomer parents, let's say they, mom went to Brown and dad, went to, I don't know, Williams or something like that. They, it's really hard to get into those schools now, like really, really hard. And so, they don't quite understand why. Well, it's simple, right? I mean, if you're Harvard, let's say, and you are drawing, you used to draw primarily regionally, that is Boston, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey corridor. You would take the best and brightest of those kids, a smattering of kids out in California, a smattering of kids in, the upper Midwest, and maybe a few in the South, and you were kind of done, right? Well, now you're competing against kids from all over the world and from all over the country, right? And part of this is good, right? I mean, some of the poor kids who are really, really smart, test well, have the credentials, they'll have a shot now because of the reaches of this. But what this does is that it's kind of a talent vacuum, right? It all kind of gets sucked up into these very specific channels.
Sure. Well, this is a Wendell Berry point. The point he likes to say that our meritocracy is sucking all the best kids, the smartest kids, out of their home communities, pulling them into these institutions, and they're not going back home for the most part, because if you
and I would add this too. Sorry, just to jump on that, is that you remember all of the elite boarding schools go co-ed sometime in the 70s. Right. And so now what you have is, perhaps some of those draws back home, the girl or the guy back home, they go on to the elite prep schools and then to the elite colleges as well. So all of that gets sort of sucked out into the big metropolitan centers. And so therefore, you have this movement from a regional elite, regional oligarchy, as Lynn calls it, to kind of a national.
And here's the consequence, too, Lynn points out, for working. If you don't, first of all, get past the gatekeepers to the right colleges, and if you are therefore not socialized to the things the elites care for, and learn their lingo, and scrub your dialect where you don't sound like you come from a place that they look down on, and if you don't, if you have a religion that they don't care for, which is to say, if you have any religion at all that's to the right of Episcopalianism, you're in trouble in the workplace. And this is really a big deal in a way that it just never has been before. The dialect thing, I can get that. Even I, as a kid, when Jimmy Carter was president, I somehow knew, even though I grew up in the Deep South,
graded a little bit.
I knew that somehow they looked down on him for that, and it's weird how I assimilated that even in the Deep South. Nevertheless, that's something understandable. That's universal, always has been, your accent and class. But the things you believe in terms of your religion and your values, even if they have nothing to do with the job you do, that is suddenly really relevant. And they're going to your future employer is going to look at your social media and see what you said and when you said it.
I thought that J.D. Vance captured this reality pretty well in the Hillbilly Elegy, and I think reflected even in the movie, which it's a lot better than all the very smart critics said about it. I thought it was actually a really moving film, but he really captures that, right? That there's these, there are all of those sort of measurable skills that you have to do in order to go, in his case, to Yale Law School. But there are all these other things that sort of accrue around. It's the sort of the social cues, and what do you wear, and which fork goes where, and which wine are you supposed to select, and there are all those kinds of things that act as a kind of a barrier of sorts. But one of a guy that I follow on Twitter, and I even subscribe to his newsletter. His name is Rob Henderson. He wrote in the New York Post, I believe, about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, about luxury beliefs. As the sort of the new elite marker, that everybody can afford, the same shoes, the same pants, the same shirt, maybe a watch, maybe not, but it's luxury beliefs that sort of become the marker of elite status, as opposed to those other kind of markers that were used in the past.
Go ahead.
And
I was going to say, you can learn how to use the right fork. You can learn the difference between Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc. What you can't do is, unless you're dishonest and believe in nothing, what you can't do is throw away your moral beliefs and your religious beliefs in order to fit in. But I believe...
And that's where I think Lynn talks about it as a kind of a dialect, right? As a kind of a elite patois, right? That it's easy to sort of mix up a dialect. I mean, again, as a Southerner, I know that my accent is significantly lighter now that I've been up here for more than a decade. In fact, one of the things my grandmother told me before she passed away, she said, "You don't sound like you're from around here anymore, Kale." And that one cut. But at any rate. It's easy to sort of change dialect and sort of dialect as a metaphor, but how do you change, your values? How do you change your religious
here's the thing. I was contacted by a friend of mine who is a young conservative Republican type who is a Christian, but he's involved in a lot of professional circles with other young conservatives, and he was saying to me that this is something that really concerns them, because these are all people who are, again, politically conservative. I think a lot of them may be Christian, very well educated. They went to the elite schools, and they're now starting to wonder, wait a minute, what does our future look like? And I think if I understood my friend correctly, he was asking, what is the hack here? How do we Well, I mean, he didn't put it that way, but I think that's kind of what he was asking, because it's what everybody has to be asking if you are a political or religious conservative who aspires to professional success in this new elite. The thing is, I think that there are three options in front of us. First of all, you can go to work for a small business where you don't, everybody knows everybody. They don't hassle you about what you believe in. All they care about is how well you can do your work. You won't be able to rise as high probably in your field, make as much money as otherwise, but you can still do your work and succeed at some level. Secondly, you could do the noble suffering option, which is to say, this is the option that a lot of people in the communist world had to take back in the day. They were told, like, you're a doctor or a lawyer or some professional level there. If you wouldn't sign the thing the government wanted you to sign or say the words the government wanted you to say, then you are out. You had to go wash windows. You could sacrifice everything for that. That's not going to be appealing to a lot of people. The third option is something that I took from Czesław Miłosz, the Polish dissident, who wrote about it in his book, The Captive Mind. He talked about Ketman, K-E-T-M-A-N. It's a Persian word meaning it's a form of hypocrisy. It's a form of double-mindedness. And he said that
Studied.
Yeah. He said that this is a strategy that people in the communist world used in order to not hate themselves, even though they were compromising their values. So they would go work and say the things they needed to say to keep their jobs, but inwardly they would say, I'm faking it. I know I'm faking it. My inner sanctum is undefiled. The problem with that, said Miłosz, is that you play this role over and over again. Sooner or later, you become you become the role. I think, Kale, what's going to happen is a lot of people in America are not going to be able to let go of the dream of professional success, monetary reward, and social mobility, rising higher and higher, such that they will learn to practice Ketman. I'm talking about conservatives and Christians. And the people that are going to hate more than anybody else are those who will not compromise, who are willing to be kicked out and be pushed to the margins of society for the sake of their religion, because the existence of those people will remind the people who practice Ketman of what they're doing.
So I had a question for you on this Ketman business. What do you make of the fact that Miłosz uses this? It's Persian, and it's specifically religious in context. I mean, what kind of parallels do we draw with this, right? Because am I correct in the genealogy? I
believe so. If I'm remembering correctly, he said it came from Ketman was what Persians did, what Muslims did when they had to, when they were, excuse me, when they were ruled by someone who was of a heretical Muslim sect, or they had to fake it in front of them. It was, I think the Persians, are Shia Muslims, and the Shia were conquered by some Sunni Muslims for a while, like the Turks, and it was that kind of thing. It was pretending that you went going along to get along, but secretly believing otherwise.
But it's interesting to me insofar as it's kind of it's a sort of a religious phenomenon, right? That you have to sort of equivocate outwardly, both in speech and in action, to sort of show yourself as marked for a supporter of the regime, such as it is, the religious and political regime, because they don't draw those distinctions in those countries, in that culture. But that like you said, there's this kind of this inner, like, I'm not breaking my inner inviolability somehow. And at least that's the swear that you make to yourself. And it's interesting. I've just got done teaching 2 Shakespeare plays. I get to do this every winter. I teach this year. I teach Macbeth and The Tempest, and therefore, I always give a couple of lectures just on the sort of the historical context and the background. And Shakespeare lived in a world in which you had to, especially in his specific time, because he lives after, he's in his early life, of course, is under Elizabeth I, that the official church, of course, is the Church of England, and Catholicism has now officially and sort of finally been outlawed. But he's part of a recusant family, right? Or certainly in a world in which many of his friends and relatives, and even his dad, was a recusant. And so you had to get into you had to make these kinds of decisions that I think you're talking about right
recusant,
now.
You mean they were Catholic?
Do I suffer and pay? Correct, right. So if you're a recusant, it means you were recusing yourself from the official state church, right? And so you had a couple of options there. You could, almost exactly sort of what you're laying out, you could live out in, the kind of the hinterlands, because the further you got away from the urban centers, the more sort of naturally Catholic it would have remained, because, England before the English Reformation is intensely Catholic. And so you could sort of stay out there, not aspire to some sort of, rank in the government or any kind of official business, and do your thing, which sort of lines up with your option number 1, which is the small business option. Or you could do the noble suffering option, which means you could publicly be a recusant, pay the tax. You, again, would not be able to play in the sort of the elite circles, or you could sign on for, the state church, and you could be part of the ruling classes. I mean, it's remarkable how it lines up. And again, I don't want to, my interest here is not in litigating and rewaging the religious wars of the Reformation right now. But it is a fascinating and similar kind of mind game that you have to play. You have to make these real consequential decisions.
I've been reading for the past couple of weeks a book about the history of the world through Muslim eyes, and it was the same thing for Christians and Jews and non-Muslims in Muslim society. They had a certain amount of freedom given to people of the book. But if you were going to maintain your obstreperous connection to Christianity or Judaism, you had to pay a tax, and there were certain things you couldn't do. I think what we're realizing here, what all of us are realizing now, is we in America are re-entering history in a sense, that the very tolerant liberalism that we worked so hard to build, our forefathers worked so hard to build, where nobody held your religion against you, nobody held... What's that?
Officially,
yeah. But we were working towards that. Yeah. Suddenly, it's all come rushing back, and it's come rushing back in a really interesting way. It's like a form of an American form of the French laïcité, where any form of religion was shoved out of public life, and you couldn't even speak of it.
Yeah, I'm fascinated with the exact same phenomena, because it comes under the guise of not religion, right? And this is, I think, worth pointing out that there is something that is ascendant and exists in such a way that everything else has to kind of bend the knee to it, right? And maybe we can talk. I mean, I don't know if this is the space or not, but we can talk a little bit about. The New York Times is this past weekend, has announced to us that it is now officially okay to be a public Christian again. I mean, what do you make of this, Rod?
It is really interesting what's happening. The reason they're doing this is because Joe Biden, very liberal Catholic, pro-LGBT, pro-abortion, and so on, all down the line, he's a church-going Catholic. And so now the Times, which has been warning us, and other elite outlets warning us for a while about theocracy and the dogma living loud within people like Amy Coney Barrett. Now suddenly it's Joe Biden is going to be the savior of the Catholic Church from the religious right. That was in the New Yorker. Paul Eli of Georgetown wrote it in the New Yorker. And I mean, I think they're deluding themselves because maybe we can even get into that if you're interested, because I don't think that there's going to be any kind of revival of left-wing Catholicism. But what's going to be interesting about it is to see how it is portrayed in the media, because any time.
Right. And even in the subset of Catholic media, which is another fascinating, rabbit hole we could go down.
Anyway, it's going to be suddenly Christianity is going to be A-OK if it doesn't challenge liberalism, and specifically if it doesn't challenge liberalism on the sexual revolution, which is to say abortion and gay rights. Those are the dividing lines right there. And the Times, of course, my gosh, Georgia just elected a preacher, a Baptist preacher, to the Senate. But he's a black Baptist preacher who is completely woke on issues of race and sexuality and abortion. So, he is...
And remember, also, he's completely woke in the theological sense as well. I mean, this is a strain of institutional infiltration that I think is also worth noting. If woke sort of comes out of law schools and English departments in the 70s and 80s and 90s, it has certainly parasitized the schools of theology, certainly the more important ones and the more official ones, and especially I think in evangelical circles. That it has captured, this wokeness, this sort of critical social justice theory has really captured these places. So Reverend Warnock, the good senator, a newly minted senator from Georgia, is nearly indistinguishable, certainly from a policy standpoint, from, let's say, I don't know, who's the most sort of progressive senator comes off the top of your head.
Bernie Sanders or...
Yeah,
who's an atheist?
There's no policy difference at all. So the question that I have is, well, what then? What actually informs the politics? It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, well, I think the interesting thing here for us, or the challenge for us conservatives, religious and political conservatives, is it doesn't do any good anymore to point out, see how hypocritical you're being? They don't care. They really don't care at all.
Right, they don't care.
But I think that we are going to have our hands full within our own religious circles with trying to fight off the wokeness from within. And I'm giving a speech on Saturday, an online speech, a pretty important lecture sponsored by St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary. A lot of people from the outside look at Orthodoxy and think, they're so conservative, they're so traditional. And mostly they're right. But there is a very powerful woke contingent concentrated among elites in the Orthodox world, academics and others, who want to see the Orthodox Church turn into a Byzantine Episcopalianism, right? And these people were not just opposed to my speaking, they tried to get me canceled, very fiercely to get me canceled, which I think is an interesting point, too, about the moment that we're in.
The scary Rod Dreher. Oh, no, he's going to talk.
And he might not even comb his hair. But isn't that interesting, though? Because today, as you and I are speaking, I put something on my blog about a situation at Baylor University where an instructor there put on her private Twitter an objection, not a screeching hysterical objection, but she objected to transgender ideology. immediately, a student mob started reporting her to the Title IX coordinator. They're trying to get her fired. And some of these students were saying on social media, we don't feel safe. We don't feel safe. I mean, we are going to have to not only manage this within our own circles, but to stand up wherever we can en masse for each other to say, no, you can't do this to people.
So on this front, right? There are a number of loud, Twitter follows there. We've mentioned before James Lindsay being one of them, who is obviously, focused on this like a laser beam and alienating all kinds of folks, even his friends, about how seriously he takes the what you and I have always somewhat jokingly, darkly jokingly, talk about the utter cultural rout of sort of the forces, the cannibalizing forces of wokeness. And I think a lot of people just sort of think it'll go away. Why do you think it's not just going to go away?
Because it has conquered the elites. And as James Davison Hunter, the sociologist at the University of Virginia, has pointed out, all permanent social change starts with the elites. And when it ends up conquering the elites and elite networks, that's when the change happens. So the kind of people, and this goes back to what we started out talking about, the kind of people who want to rise up in the American meritocracy and whatever their profession, they are going to have to learn to speak this language and to believe the things elites believe, or at least do Ketman and pretend to believe it so they can rise. And wokeness serves as sort of a substitute religion for them. America is becoming less religious. We're de-Christianizing. There's no question about that. Just look at the statistics. And but that religious impulse is being poured into social justice and being social justice warriors. So I think for them, this is not a matter of politics as much as it is a matter of the sacred, a form of religion.
Yeah, the Ketman strategy I find to be particularly interesting, right? And as I try to get into the psychology of the Ketman game, I understand it, right? You're you, and you think what you think, and you might think that some of these people are kind of crazy, but they are coming, and it's like a wave, and it's sort of coming at you, and you're just like, all right, I'm just gonna duck, let this wave kind of crash over. I'll redo. But my question is, as a strategy, we know that beyond sort of weathering that first wave, I'm not sure what the game plan is long term. How long do you continue to play the Ketman game, especially if there are no reinforcements coming? I mean, what do you gain, right? I mean, what do you gain? And again, I'm going to keep going back to the English the English Reformation. One of my heroes, of course, is Thomas More, and of course, in A Man for All Seasons, the famous line he offers to Richie Rich, right? You did all this, for whales, and so you can see how Richie Rich in the movie is playing the game, right? He's playing the elite game, and in order to mint yourself as part of the elite, you have to mouth certain things. You have to turn certain people in. You have to become state's evidence and all those things. What's the name of that boy in the early Soviet Union? I forget.
Morozov? The guy, he became the boy the hero for turning his parents in.
That's right. And this sort of this purity, right? This thing, he's sort of this sort of marker. And I'm sort of reminded of sort of Greta Thunberg and a lot of these sort of young activists. It's like we rush in to sort of make them the sort of the poster child of ideological purity. But in that game, what are you doing it for? I mean, you're doing it for a bite of the apple, right? You're doing it for a swing, look, stock in trade of sort of the conservative, complaint for my entire adult life is, Rod is being nice and being anti-Trump because he wants to go to the cocktail parties, right? These famous Washington D.C. cocktail parties that are completely ridiculous.
I live in Baton Rouge,
but it's interesting. You can see how that hooks. Right, right. But you can see how that kind of plays into people's suspicions.
Well,
right?
I mean, look, the fact of the matter is, it all comes down to something that a friend of mine is about to go, a decision he's about to make. He is a religious conservative, very accomplished in his field, lives in a small town in a place where he and his wife and kids are really happy. They moved away from wokeness. Wokeness has not reached them there, and he's very happy with it. Well, he's been offered a really big job in a major East Coast city, and this is an incredible achievement, right? But if he wanted to take it, he would have to move himself and his family to this city, where the kids would be raised in an environment that is pretty anti-Christian, and where he's going to have to enter into the world of wokeness in this institution. And he's going to have to learn how to play Ketman. I warned him. I said, look, this is an incredible opportunity for you, but if you do it, it's going to cost you more than you want to pay. Trust me on this. And I don't know what he's going to do, but this kind of decision, Kale, is going to have to be made by a lot of people. If I could, my kids are older now. If I could move back to D.C., I could really make a lot more money, because I could supplement my American conservative salary with TV gigs, and I could promote my books on TV all the time. It would be a sweet thing. But I wouldn't do it. I would not want to live back in that kind of environment. And I don't say that as a condemnation of the people who do, but I lived it once, and I'm glad I had it. But I can see where this culture is going, and I have friends who are raising their kids in the D.C. suburbs, and a lot of them, despite having been raised in a religiously conservative home, a lot of them are losing their faith because of the ambient culture around them.
Yeah, look, this is something that wakes me up every morning. Wakes me up with my own family, with my own kids. It reminds me of something that Aaron Rand talks about in his newsletter called The Masculinist.
What a great newsletter. People should subscribe.
Oh, so good. Yeah, Aaron Rand, The Masculinist. I think he's now doing it full time. He's got a website now called The Masculinist, and I'll include the links to to his worthy work in the description here for this video. But he talks early on, he's been doing this newsletter for, a couple of years at least now, maybe 3 years. And he talked early on about the 3 stages of Christianity. And he talked about it like this: from basically up until around 1994, you had what he called sort of the 3 worlds. The first world of positive world Christianity, that being a Christian was seen and perceived and esteemed as basically a good thing. It was admirable. It was it held a certain amount of social clout, etc. And then in the middle stage is neutral. The neutral world which was roughly 1994 to 2014, and as the title would suggest, it's neutral to be Christian. It's fine. It's not really an animating principle. And he says in 2014, I think this is where you and he overlap with a lot of your work on TAC, and I'm probably sure this is probably with Obergefell, if memory serves, is that we now live in a negative world, right? Christians need to understand that it is now clearly perceived in elite circles that being a Christian is not stomachable. It's not advisable to advance your career. It is a marker of some sort of deep bigotry and disgust, frankly, in the surrounding culture. And he says that now he's writing from an evangelical standpoint primarily, but his insights, I think, are fantastic. He says that the sooner we recognize that we live in the negative world, the better we will be. And I think this is clearly the case. And yet, Rod, even now, I joke that Live Not by Lies, is sort of, the prequel to the Benedict option in a funny kind of way, even though you wrote it secondly. Still you have Christians looking at you in the face and saying, Mr. Dreher, I think I should just be able to love Jesus and everything will take care of itself.
Well, I mean, these are the same people who are going to capitulate, who are going to conform and will rationalize it and will not even know what hit them. When I give this talk on Saturday, my audience is going to be primarily seminarians. I mean, there are people from all over the country signing in. You can watch it on Zoom at St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary.com. But I'm speaking mostly to the seminarians. One of the things I'm going to tell them is the kind of Christians that are going to survive this coming, the world that we're in now and that is coming. And it's going to be Christians who are so deeply rooted in their faith and who prefer Christ to nothing else, such that they will refuse the opportunities to move to the big cities, to rise in the firms, to rise in their profession, because they know that it will exact too high a price on them. And this is something that nobody wants to hear. I gave a talk to a group recently of young conservatives online, and the host said, and these are young professional conservatives, the host said, so what advice would you leave us with? And I said, well, I think you need to prepare yourselves to suffer well. And he said, that's not a very winning slogan. I said, no, it's not, but it happens to be the truth. So this is the challenge, the number one challenge, not only for pastors, future pastors and priests, but also for parents like you and me. We have to prepare our kids for a world in which they have to make real sacrifices if they are going to follow Jesus Christ.
So I'm, as I mentioned last episode, I've been listening to the memoirs of St. Peter, a translation and a hypothesis by Professor Pakaluk about the Gospel of St. Mark. And I just got to the point where James and John come up to Peter, they come up to Jesus and they say, Lord, when we would like to be on your left and on your right. And the translation is great. Pakaluk's translation is great, and obviously I can't recreate it by memory. But he basically says, you don't understand what you're asking me. Number one, you don't understand the nature of the kingdom. But number two, he has just told the apostles. This is post-transfiguration. He's just told the apostles, and again, the apostles are the 12, right? He keeps calling them the 12, and so Jesus is not scared of hierarchies. He's not scared of categories, and he basically says, "Yeah, I'm going to suffer and I'm going to die." And then Peter pipes up and says, "No, you're not." And Jesus rebukes him. Now he's just called Peter the one. Right? And Peter says, well, no, you're not. And he says, get behind me, Satan. Unless you understand, you're asking to be part, on my left and on my right. Do you understand what you're being baptized into? It's suffering.
Yep.
It's the whole bit. And look, is there anything, less American sounding than, let's all get in line to suffer a little bit more.
And, I see we're running out of time here, but I want to talk about something before we went away, something a little bit off the beaten track, but I think important and relevant to this. Since we last talked, I have been engaged myself in weaning myself off of Ambien, the prescription sleep medication.
Yeah.
And it was something that I didn't mean to happen but I ended up losing my bottle of it. And I said, you know what? Now's the time to get off of it after 12 years. And it has been excruciating. I mean, really excruciating. But I'm almost to the end of the process, and I thank God for it. But and I realized, though, that, and I'm looking at the Ambien as a metaphor, the Ambien withdrawal for what we're doing our talking about here. I got on this prescription. My doctor prescribed it for me after years ago, like in 2008, when I had a panic attack over some bad medical stuff going on in our family, and I couldn't sleep. He said, here, try this. Oh, it was magic, Kale. I slept like a baby, and I loved it so much, I kept taking it. Before I knew it, I couldn't sleep without it. And every time I tried to get off of it over the years, it would be more difficult. I mean, excruciatingly difficult. And I said, I can't deal with it. I finally got to the point recently where I took advantage of having lost the bottle for a couple of days just to say I'm going cold turkey. And I wouldn't recommend going cold turkey. A lot of people take Ambien, and it was horrible going cold turkey. Nevertheless, I did it because even though I found the bottle 2 days into this detox, because I wanted to be free of this stupid sleep drug more than I wanted to have an easy life and to avoid this week of really intense suffering. So, and I'm feeling so much better now. I'm starting to sleep normally again. I want to exercise, but I have learned a couple of things from this. First of all, that there's no easy way out, period. That the only way I was ever going to get off this drug was to be willing to go through this suffering. And I don't want to make it sound like the Betty Ford Clinic on the bayou here, but it's just a difficult thing. You take sleep for granted. And I thought a drug like Ambien would be really minor because it's just governing sleep. But it turns out it does really nasty things to your brain. But it's also the case that I've developed a lot more compassion for people who are trying to kick any kind of addiction, whether it's to cigarettes, to alcohol, to prescription drugs, to whatever, because first of all, it's hard and it requires a lot of discipline. And secondly, though, you realize how there is nothing in this culture of ours, or very little in this culture of ours, that encourages people to do this sort of thing. There's always somebody there say, no, take the easy way out. Just say you agree with it, or just do this thing. Take this thing. Get you a good night's sleep. Be good to yourself. And these are virtues that are lost in our culture today. And I think probably what it was for me, my doctor was just trying to help me, because I was really suffering. Sure. But and I allowed myself, though, to go take the easy path to sleep. And that stuff had me for 12 years.
Well, it's amazing. Again, that reminds me of the essay I brought up earlier, that this everything's broken and our churches are broken, our politics are broken, our medicine is broken. I mean, talk about a perfect storm for COVID, right? In the larger picture of it. But, and you can see there's nothing really nefarious about it. You just sort of, smooth off those edges a little bit and like ease the reentry and get some sleep. And these are all fine things. But, we venture into these places and we don't know the implications for what we're doing to ourselves. And I'm reminded as always, I keep going back to this image of Chesterton's fence, before, if you come up upon a fence, in the middle of the woods, before you're too quick to sort of pull it down and move it or, take it out, maybe you should spend a little time asking why it's there, and again, I know it's easy. I don't suffer from insomnia, so I those occasional bouts I have with it drive me absolutely bonkers, but maybe there's a reason you're up, again, I know that's a little bit too flip and too easy for me to say, but these are opportunities for us to pray. They're opportunities for us to suffer. They're opportunities for us to think and work some things out, and all too often I think we're tempted to let go of those opportunities to our own detriment.
And one of the things I've really loved about being and becoming more engaged with my Orthodox faith is how Orthodox approach suffering, period. It's that this is a chance for you to grow closer to God, to have a share of Christ's suffering, but also to die to yourself. Now, the Orthodox would never say you should suffer without relief because it is a positive good. Sure. Orthodox believe, we're not crazy people. We believe that if you've broken your arm, you can take a pain pill. But I think right. that though that there are gradations here, right? And I don't think there would have been anything wrong for me using Ambien for a week or so, maybe 2 weeks. But it's the dependency, how easy it was to get dependent on it, and how this doctor I know recently, a doctor friend, has said, "Hey, I've just gotten off of Ambien. It was really rough, but boy, I feel so much better." He said, "Thank God. I was so worried about you because we don't know what that stuff does to the brain and that whole class of drugs." And it was just an opportunity for me to think in ways that I really don't often think about how quick we are as Americans, and I am myself, to go for the thing that makes life easy instead of doing the hard work. And before you know it, the easy thing has us. And this goes back to what you and I were talking about at the very beginning. You start making these compromises in the office, whether you're a priest compromising in your diocese, whether you're an office worker, whatever you're in. You make these compromises thinking, well, it's not going to get me if I just say this, and I can be a good influence on the people around me, and on and on and on. And before you know it, you're in so deep that in order to get out, it's going to feel like an exorcism.
Right. Well, it senses like, it feels like that. It tracks like that. It's like a form of an exorcism. although this one is pharmacological.
No, but it did remind me of that.
All
I
right,
have to say to you that I was telling my wife, I said, like the last 3 nights, it's been like I have these horrible nightmares. And I never have nightmares. I have anxiety dreams. I never have nightmares. But said it feels like a demon almost. I'm not speaking literally, but it feels like a demon fighting to take every little bit he can, hold on to every little bit he can, and it's just been.
Well, I feel there's something there. I feel I feel like if demons can affect us physically, I mean, there's got to be some kind of overlap there. Like if they have access to our source code, so to speak. Like I think that's how they would act. That sort of it's like extracting this thing out, and it's going to hold on and grip as tight as possible until the very end, until there's some sort of pop and a release.
Anyway, on that happy note.
Yeah. Well, so okay. So, what are you doing for fun?
Fun.
Besides it, what have you listened to, watched, read, tasted, drank?
I'm just finishing up the Martin Scorsese thing. I think we talked about in the last podcast. Martin Scorsese's Netflix series called "Pretend It's a City" with Fran Lebowitz. I thought before it was just one episode, a short film. It turns out there's 7 of them. Yeah. And I just finishing that up. And last night's episode, she said something really great. You'll love this. Fran is saying that she's like 70 years old, this crabby, New York, Manhattan Jewish woman. She says, people come up to me, these young people, and they say, well, I don't want to read that. I don't see myself in a book. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't see yourself in a book? A book is not supposed to be a mirror. A book is a door. And she talks about how, as a kid, she learned to love books because they were doorways to other ways of seeing the world, to other worlds. And I thought that's exactly it. Where do we get this idea that in order to be valuable to us, we have to see ourselves in books? Yeah,
there's a deep narcissism in that, and I see it so much in educational establishments. That you have to, identify in this weird sort of way. I so agree. That's a great line. Well, what I've been listening to lately is I've been listening to another Jewish person, the great Jewish blues guitarist Paul Bloomfield, out of Chicago, and I stumbled upon him. I'm a big fan of popular, rock music, etc., and I'm a big Bob Dylan fan, and about a few months back, I was on YouTube. I said, is there any video of when Dylan goes electric in Newport? Right, I live a few ticks up from Newport. I was like, I've always known that was the moment that rocked the folk world, and Dylan catapults us into the rock world by plugging in his guitar. Anyway, so I found a video, but it's more audio than video, and I'm listening to this guitarist, and I'm like, that can't be Bob Dylan. There's no way. It's this guy just shredding. I mean, he is amazing. And so I'm doing all this research. Who is the guitarist for Dylan's band when he goes electric? And it's Paul Bloomfield. So I am on this massive deep dive into the world of Paul Bloomfield. So audience, if you like rock music, if you like blues guitar, check out Paul Bloomfield. He is amazing.
On that note, I should say too that the New York Times denounced Fran Lebowitz this week. They had this columnist, Gina Belafonte, who reviewed the series, and she said, "Why do people like Fran Lebowitz?" And you just read this, and you just want Fran to go up there and shake her. It's just like Gina Belafonte. She's my age. I looked her up. I'm like, she's got to be one of these wokesters. Who just, why are you making fun of that? Nope, she's my age. But do not pay attention to the New York Times. Watch this show. It's magic.
That's right. All right. So on that, this is the end of the General Eclectic podcast with Rod Dreher. I'm your host, Kale Zelden, and episode 4 is a wrap. What you got?
Don't get nothing on you, like Uncle Bubba says.
All right, man. Be well. Take care. Bye-bye.